In the cradle of the Tigris and Euphrates, something extraordinary happened. Humanity stepped beyond survival, building the first cities, laws, and myths that would shape the world for millennia. Sumer was not just a civilization, it was the spark of organized society, where clay tablets carried the first written words, temples reached for the heavens, and kings and priests forged power in the name of the divine. From Uruk to Ur, from the code of Uruk-agina to the epic of Gilgamesh, every innovation echoed far beyond its time, leaving traces in Babylon, Assyria, and even our modern world. For thousands of years, the Sumerians were forgotten, their cities buried beneath the desert sands, until archaeologists unearthed their legacy, a civilization that never truly died. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to continue exploring the mysteries of our ancient world. Long before the first kings rose to power, before the temples pierced the sky and the scribes pressed their styluses into soft clay, there was a land alive with possibility, a land cradled between two mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. In this fertile crescent, where the river's waters carved life from the earth, humanity first dared to step beyond mere survival. Here, small farming settlements began to grow into something far greater, the first true cities, and with them, the birth of civilization itself. The earliest Sumerians were farmers, tending plots of barley and wheat, coaxing life from soil enriched by the annual flood. Their villages were modest clusters of mud brick homes, their lives bound by the rhythm of the rivers, the rise and fall of the seasons. Survival demanded cooperation. Irrigation channels had to be dug, harvests coordinated, and the delicate balance of water managed with care. In learning to work together, these early people were laying the foundations for something more enduring than any individual life, a society. From these simple beginnings emerged the first cities, Eridu, Uruk, Ur, Lagash. Each city was more than a collection of homes. It was a symbol of ambition, a bold attempt to impose order on a chaotic world. Streets were carefully planned, temples rose toward the heavens, and bustling marketplaces echoed with the exchange of grain, crafted goods, and ideas. In these spaces, survival transformed into culture, and culture into civilization. But it was writing that would mark the true leap. On clay tablets, the Sumerians inscribed their thoughts, transactions, and prayers in the earliest form of cuneiform. Words became more than speech. They became memory made permanent, capable of surviving the passage of generations. Here, humanity discovered a new power, the ability to shape the present and preserve it for the future. Laws could be recorded, stories could endure, and the deeds of men and gods could be remembered long after their voices faded. Sumer was not merely a product of fertile soil. It was a civilization born from imagination and belief. Temples and ziggurats soared like stairways to the heavens, where humans could seek guidance from the divine. Music, ritual, and festival punctuated the year, binding people together in shared experience and collective purpose. Even the smallest objects, a carved seal, a decorated vessel, a finely wrought bracelet, held layers of meaning, linking the mundane with the spiritual, the individual with the cosmos. With growth came complexity. Hierarchies emerged, leaders arose, and the first concepts of governance and law began to take shape. Surplus crops allowed specialization. Artisans, priests, and scribes each contributed to the delicate machinery of the city. For the first time, humans were not merely surviving, they were organizing, planning, and envisioning a future beyond the lifespan of a single generation. As the sun rose over the plains of Sumer, it illuminated a world in transformation. Civilization had begun not as an accident, but as a deliberate act of the human mind, a choice to build, to organize, and to remember. Sumer was more than a collection of cities. It was the embodiment of humanity's first great leap, the transition from wandering in the shadows of survival to shaping a society conscious of its destiny. Here, the seeds of law, writing, and urban life took root, and the story of humankind, written in clay and stone, began. Amid the fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates nourished the land, rose a city unlike any the world had seen: Uruk. From humble villages and cultivated fields emerged a metropolis that would define what it meant to be a city for all time. Its walls, temples, and bustling streets were not merely structures of clay and mud, but monuments to human ambition, ingenuity, and the desire to shape the world according to human will. Uruk was the first urban giant, the heartbeat of Sumerian civilization. At its center stood massive temple complexes dedicated to the goddess Inanna, whose presence infused every facet of life. The ziggurat, a stepped tower of brick, rose toward the sky as a bridge between earth and heaven, embodying the Sumerians' longing to connect with the divine. Priest-kings ruled from these sacred spaces, wielding authority both spiritual and temporal, guiding the city through growth while ensuring the gods' favor. Festivals honoring Inanna brought Uruk alive with music, dance, and ritual, uniting citizens in a shared rhythm of devotion. Uruk was also the birthplace of writing, an invention that would forever transform humanity. On clay tablets, the first cuneiform symbols recorded trade, laws, and the deeds of rulers. These marks transformed memory into permanence, allowing daily events to echo across generations. With writing came administration, commerce, and complex social organization. The city became a hub where knowledge could be stored, exchanged, and expanded. Accounts of barley, silver, and laborers were carefully maintained, revealing a sophisticated economy that relied on calculation and record-keeping rather than guesswork. Life in Uruk was vibrant and multifaceted. Markets thrived with the sounds of merchants calling, the clatter of pottery, and the scent of spices from distant lands. Artisans shaped clay and metal, into tools, jewelry, and ceremonial objects, blending utility with symbolism. Streets teemed with activity as farmers, craftsmen, priests, and scribes moved in a carefully balanced rhythm, each sustaining the city. Urban planning, though primitive by modern standards, revealed a striking understanding of order, efficiency, and society as a coordinated organism rather than scattered homes. Uruk's significance went beyond its walls and markets. It was a cultural beacon where myths, poetry, and songs crystallized into enduring traditions. The tales of Gilgamesh, the legendary king, were first woven into the city's fabric, capturing human hopes, fears, and ambitions. Uruk became more than a city of brick and clay. It was a mirror of human aspiration, a symbol of what civilization could achieve when people worked, imagined, and recorded together. As the sun rose over Uruk, its light glinting off mud brick walls and illuminating terraces, the first metropolis in history awakened. It was a city of order from chaos, permanence from fleeting life, and ingenuity reaching for the heavens. Uruk was not just a place to live. It was a declaration that humanity could build, plan, and remember. It was the first urban giant, a blueprint for all future cities, and living proof that civilization had become a tangible reality. In Uruk, we witnessed the dawn of organized society, where architecture, governance, economy, and culture merged. Between rivers and under the gaze of the gods, humanity took a monumental step, forever altering the course of history. Long before humans inscribed the first laws or built the towering ziggurats of Sumer, they looked to the skies and rivers with reverence, seeking to understand the forces that governed life itself. For the Sumerians, the universe was alive with the presence of gods, beings who ruled over wind, water, fertility, and destiny, whose moods and desires could shape the fate of cities and the survival of entire peoples. These were not distant deities, aloof and removed. They were intimately entwined with the natural world, guiding the daily rhythms of life, yet demanding respect, offerings, and devotion. At the heart of the Sumerian pantheon stood Enlil, the god of air and storms, whose breath carried both life and destruction. Enlil could grant prosperity through the rains that nourished crops, or unleash chaos with fierce winds and floods. He embodied the duality of nature itself, nurturing yet unpredictable, a reminder that human survival depended upon understanding and appeasing the forces beyond their control. Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creation, played a complementary role. From the fresh waters of rivers and canals, he gave life to crops, animals, and humanity itself. Enki was the divine craftsman, a deity of cleverness and strategy, whose myths celebrated ingenuity and problem-solving. In the stories of Sumer, it was Enki who taught humans the arts of agriculture, irrigation, and even writing, gifts that allowed society to flourish. Through his guidance, mortals could glimpse the potential to shape their destiny, blending divine inspiration with human effort. Then there was Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and cosmic balance, a figure of striking complexity. She was both nurturing and fierce, patron of the city of Uruk, whose temples bore her name. Inanna's myths recount journeys to the underworld, triumphs and defeats, reflecting the cycles of life, death, and renewal. She embodied the tension between order and chaos, passion and restraint, demonstrating that civilization itself was a delicate balance between human ambition and the forces of the cosmos. Sumerian religion was not mere superstition. It was a framework for understanding the world and humanity's place within it. Every flood, every bountiful harvest, and every unexpected calamity was read as a sign from the gods, a message encoded in the natural and social order. Priests interpreted these signs, performing rituals and offering sacrifices to maintain harmony between mortals and the divine. Temples, adorned with sacred art and ceremonial objects, served as both spiritual and civic centers, reinforcing the bond between religion, governance, and daily life. Through myths and rituals, the Sumerians constructed a universe in which human actions mattered, but always in dialogue with forces greater than themselves. These stories were etched into clay tablets, sung in hymns, and dramatized in festivals, creating a shared consciousness that united communities under common beliefs. They taught lessons about responsibility, morality, and survival, encoding both practical knowledge and spiritual wisdom into narratives that could endure across generations. The gods of Sumer, from Enlil's storms to Enki's wisdom and Inanna's daring, were mirrors of the human condition, powerful, unpredictable, and awe-inspiring. By weaving the divine into every aspect of life, the Sumerians created a culture in which human ambition was guided, tested, and illuminated by forces far larger than themselves. In this way, their gods were not only rulers of heaven and earth, but architects of civilization itself, shaping the moral and social framework that allowed cities, laws, and culture to flourish. Through their devotion, the Sumerians learned that life was a negotiation with the cosmos, a dance between mortality and eternity. And it was in this dance between human effort and divine will that the first true civilization found its enduring rhythm. In the cities of ancient Sumer, power was never merely a matter of wealth or arms. It was a sacred charge, a delicate balance between mortal ambition and divine will. At the heart of each city-state, the Lugal, the king, ruled not only with the authority of his people, but with a claim of mandate from the gods themselves. He was more than a military leader or administrator. He was the earthly representative of cosmic order, the guarantor of harmony between the human and divine. Yet he did not rule alone. Alongside him stood the priestly elite, guardians of ritual, temple, and the sacred knowledge that sustained both spiritual and social life. Together, king and priest wove the intricate tapestry of governance that defined Sumer. The Lugal's power derived from the belief that the gods had chosen him to uphold justice and maintain the prosperity of the city. His decrees were not mere politics. They were extensions of divine will, intended to mirror the order of heaven upon the earth. In times of war, He led armies with strategy and authority. Yet even in battle, he was guided by ritual and omens, seeking the gods' favor before action. In times of peace, he oversaw irrigation, trade, and the enforcement of law, ensuring that the lifeblood of the city, its people, its grain, its wealth, flowed in harmony with both earthly needs and celestial designs. Priests, meanwhile, wielded a subtler but equally potent form of power. They maintained temples, conducted ceremonies, interpreted omens, and managed vast economic networks linked to temple estates. Temples were centers of production, storage, and administration, often rivaling the king in influence. Priests read the messages in the movements of stars, the behavior of animals, and the flow of rivers, translating signs from the divine into guidance for rulers and citizens alike. Their authority was rooted in knowledge, ritual, and the unbroken link to the gods, making them indispensable allies or formidable rivals to the king. The relationship between Lugal and priest was a symbiosis of necessity and strategy. Kings needed the legitimacy provided by the gods' earthly interpreters. Priests needed the protection and resources the king could command. Together, they created a political system where piety reinforced power and power enforced piety. The construction of temples, the orchestration of festivals, and the enforcement of laws were not only expressions of governance, but acts of devotion, public demonstrations that the city was aligned with divine order. Yet this order was fragile. Ambition, rivalry, and the unpredictable forces of nature constantly tested the balance. A poor harvest, a flood, or an ill-timed omen could challenge a king's claim, forcing him to appease the priests, the people, or the gods themselves. In this delicate dance, leadership required wisdom, strategy, and a profound understanding of both human and cosmic nature. It was a world in which power and faith were inseparable, where political authority could not exist without ritual legitimacy, and where the gods' favor was the ultimate currency of rule. Through this union of crown and altar, Sumerian cities flourished. Administrative records, tax lists, and legal codes emerged as instruments of governance, preserving not only wealth, but social order. Temples became repositories of knowledge and culture, and kings became patrons of art, architecture, and literature, leaving legacies that intertwined human achievement with divine purpose. In Sumer, the order of power was not simply a matter of might. It was a sacred architecture of society itself. Kings and priests together formed the pillars of civilization, ensuring that authority was grounded in belief as much as in law. It was here that humanity first experiments. Here with the profound idea that leadership could be both earthly and divine, practical and spiritual, mortal and eternal, a blueprint for governance that would echo through the millennia. Long before paper or ink, before pens scratched across parchment, humanity faced a profound limitation. Memory, stories, transactions, laws, and prayers could only survive as long as the mind of a storyteller or the word of a witness. In the fertile cities of Sumer, however, a revolution quietly unfolded. It began with clay, reeds, and the pressing of marks that would forever alter the course of civilization. This was the birth of cuneiform, the earliest known system of writing, and with it, humanity found a way to speak across time. The first marks were simple pictographs, each representing objects or basic concepts: a head of grain, a jar of oil, a herd of sheep. But even in their simplicity, they revealed an extraordinary realization: that human thought could be captured outside the fragile confines of memory. As the marks multiplied and evolved, abstract ideas began to appear: numbers, laws, contracts, and the names of kings and gods. Clay tablets, baked in the sun or in ovens, became durable vessels for knowledge, impervious to the fleeting span of a human life. The act of writing itself was a ritual. Scribes, trained for years in the careful precision of cuneiform, pressed reeds into soft clay, creating wedge-shaped impressions that could be read, copied, and preserved. These marks were more than mere symbols. They were a bridge between the tangible world and the conceptual, a way to order society, codify law, and record the movements of the stars. Through cuneiform, Sumerians began to see their world in new ways, as a system of rules, relationships, and responsibilities that could be described, analyzed, and remembered. Writing transformed every aspect of Sumerian life. Farmers' inventories, temple offerings, and trade transactions could now be recorded with accuracy, reducing disputes and ensuring that wealth and labor were documented. Kings immortalized their deeds and decrees on monumental inscriptions, projecting authority and legitimacy across generations. Priests recorded hymns, rituals, and omens, preserving spiritual knowledge and embedding it within the fabric of culture. Even the tales of gods and heroes, the epic journeys of Gilgamesh, the wisdom of Enki, the power of Inanna were etched into clay, allowing myths to endure long after the voices that first told them had fallen silent. Cuneiform was also a tool of expansion. As Sumerian influence spread to Akkad, Babylon, and beyond, the script was adapted for other languages, creating a shared intellectual framework across the Near East. In doing so, Sumer's ideas, laws, and stories reached distant cities, allowing cultures separated by rivers, deserts, and mountains to communicate in ways previously unimaginable. Clay tablets, once modest scribbles in Uruk, became instruments of diplomacy, commerce, and scholarship. Yet the significance of cuneiform extended far beyond practical administration. Writing was the first act of transforming thought into permanence, of defying the fleeting nature of human existence. It allowed societies to reflect upon themselves, to learn from the past, and to envision the future. A law written on clay could outlast a king. A poem could outlive its composer. A ledger could ensure fairness for generations yet unborn. Through this innovation, Sumerians claimed not only mastery over their environment, but over the very passage of memory itself. In the quiet press of a reed against clay, humanity discovered a profound truth, that words could endure where flesh could not, that civilization required not only labor and organization, but memory, codified and shared. Cuneiform was more than writing. It was the first voice of history, a means to speak across the centuries, to preserve the achievements, beliefs, and dreams of a people awakening to the power of permanence. Through those wedge-shaped marks, the Sumerians ensured that their world, their triumphs, fears, and visions would never be lost to time. In the earliest cities of Sumer, life was a delicate balance between order and chaos. Wealthy landowners and powerful priests often held sway over the masses, and disputes could quickly erupt into violence. Yet in this world of inequality and unpredictability, a quiet revolution was taking shape, the codification of law. Long before Hammurabi would immortalize justice in stone, the Sumerians had already taken the first steps toward creating rules that bound not only the powerful, but all members of society. One of the earliest known lawgivers was Urukagina, ruler of the city of Lagash, around the 24th century BCE. Archaeological fragments of his code reveal a strikingly modern vision, a ruler seeking to restrain the exploitation of the weak, to limit the arbitrary power of priests, and to ensure fairness for ordinary citizens. Temple property, once easily seized by the ambitious, was protected. Taxes and labor obligations were reduced to prevent crushing burdens on farmers and artisans. In Urukagina's words, the state began to act as a guardian of justice, stepping in where the powerful might otherwise have prevailed. The principle was simple yet profound. Law could be more than a reflection of the whims of rulers or the strength of the mighty. It could embody fairness, consistency, and order. In the centuries that followed, this foundation was expanded. Ur-Nammu, founder of the third dynasty of Ur around 2112 BCE, created a code now considered the oldest surviving written legal code. Carved into clay tablets, it set a precedent that would resonate across the ancient world. Unlike earlier customs, where vengeance and violence determined outcomes, Ur-Nammu prescribed monetary compensation and structured punishments. Injuries, thefts, and debts were no longer matters of personal retaliation. They became communal matters, codified and predictable. What made Sumerian law remarkable was its dual purpose. It restrained the powerful while legitimizing authority. Each code began with a prologue declaring that the king acted under divine command, that the gods themselves had entrusted him with the task of bringing justice. Law was therefore not only a tool of governance, but a manifestation of cosmic order, intertwining human society with divine will. When a judgment was pronounced, it carried the weight not just of the city-state, but of the heavens themselves. Sumerian law also reflected the structure of society. Free citizens, slaves, women, and children all had defined rights and responsibilities, a recognition that stability required clarity in relationships and expectations. To modernize, some distinctions may appear harsh, yet within the framework of the time, they provided a system of predictability in a world prone to sudden violence and famine. The law created a space where ordinary people could appeal, could seek redress, and could experience a measure of security previously unknown. Over generations, these legal innovations spread across the region. Later rulers like Lipit Ishtar of Isin extended the codes to cover marriage, property, and commerce. The Sumerians had discovered that civilization depended not only on irrigation, writing, and cities, but also on fairness, the delicate scaffolding of trust and justice that allowed society to endure. The seeds planted by Urukagina and Ur-Nammu would grow into traditions embraced by Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria, culminating in the monumental Code of Hammurabi, which systematized centuries of Sumerian legal wisdom. In Sumer, law was not merely a set of rules, it was a statement of human aspiration. It was the acknowledgement that societies could rise above the instincts of revenge and the tyranny of the strong, that justice could be codified, shared, and preserved. The rise of law in Sumer marked the first time humanity consciously sought to regulate itself, to protect the powerless, and to transform the chaotic world into one of enduring order. In the wedge-shaped inscriptions on clay, the first whispers of justice in human history were etched, and with them, the dawn of a civilization capable of remembering, judging, and aspiring toward fairness. In the bustling city of Lagash, along the fertile banks of the Tigris, a quiet revolution began not with armies or conquest, but with the stroke of a stylus upon clay. Around the 24th century BCE, Urukagina, the ruler of Lagash, sought to reshape society, not merely through power, but through law. His reforms marked one of the earliest known attempts in human history to use written codes as instruments of social justice, to protect the weak from the overreach of the strong, and to curb the corruption that so often threatened human communities. The society of Sumer was vibrant, yet fragile. Temples controlled immense wealth, nobles held influence by birth, and the ordinary people, farmers, laborers, and artisans, could be crushed beneath arbitrary demands. It was in this landscape that Urukagina carved a vision of fairness. His reforms prohibited the unlawful seizure of temple property, reduced burdensome taxes, and limited the imposition of forced labor. In doing so, he sent a powerful message. Justice was no longer the privilege of the elite. It could be a shield for those who had previously been vulnerable. The Code of Urukagina was revolutionary in its simplicity and intent. Each reform represented a step toward creating a society where order and fairness coexisted. The ruler's intervention was not arbitrary, it was deliberate and codified. By putting these laws into writing, Urukagina ensured that they would endure beyond his reign, accessible to those who might otherwise be silenced by privilege or fear. For the first time, power was held accountable, and the common people were granted a voice within the legal framework of their city. What makes Urukagina's legacy remarkable is the philosophical shift embedded in his actions. For millennia, justice had often been a matter of personal vengeance or divine favor. Blood feuds, temple exactions, and the whims of power feuds. Men dictated the lives of ordinary citizens. Urukagina dared to imagine a different path, a society in which rules, not force alone, determined outcomes, in which the state could intervene to restore balance, in which law became a reflection of ethics rather than merely authority. Though only fragments of his code survive, they illuminate a society wrestling with inequality and corruption. Urukagina sought to prevent the abuse of religious and political office, to establish limits on the wealth and power of the few, and to protect ordinary citizens from exploitation. These reforms were not just legal mandates, they were moral statements, a declaration that leadership carried responsibility to the governed, and that society was stronger when justice prevailed. The ripple effects of Urukagina's reforms extended beyond Lagash. By establishing the precedent that law could serve the people and restrain rulers, he planted seeds that would later blossom in the codes of Ur-Nammu, Lipit Ishtar, and ultimately Hammurabi. The idea that rulers could be instruments of fairness, that justice could be codified and observed, became central to Mesopotamian civilization. In this way, the small city of Lagash became a beacon, illuminating a path toward ethical governance that resonated for centuries. Urukagina's code reminds us that the roots of social justice stretch far deeper than modern thought often acknowledges. In the hands of a visionary, clay tablets became instruments of equity. They were more than legal documents, they were symbols of human aspiration. They told of a society willing to challenge privilege, to confront corruption, and to envision a future where the weak could find protection in the structures of power. As the sun set over Lagash, its light fell upon temples, markets, and homes alike, a city united under laws that sought balance, fairness, and dignity. In this small Sumerian city, humanity learned an enduring lesson, that civilization is measured not only by its monuments or armies, but by its capacity for justice. The code of Urukagina endures in memory and in principle, a testament to the first recorded attempt to enshrine the rights of the people within the annals of history. In the city of Ur, rising along the banks of the Euphrates, a transformation was quietly taking place, a transformation not of walls or temples, but of society itself. Around 2112 BCE, Ur-Nammu, founder of the third dynasty of Ur, undertook a revolution that would forever change the way humans understood justice. While previous rulers had sought to restrain corruption and protect the powerless, Ur-Nammu went further. He replaced the age-old law of personal vengeance with a rational system of compensation, laying the foundations for the first truly codified legal order. In Sumerian society, conflict had long been settled by blood. If a man struck another, the natural response was retaliation, the eye for an eye, the life for a life. These cycles of violence perpetuated insecurity and fear, leaving the weak at the mercy of stronger neighbors or powerful families. Ur-Nammu's insight was profound. Justice need not be an emotional reaction, but a structured principle. He introduced penalties in silver or goods rather than blood, creating a system in which crime and punishment could be measured, standardized, and enforced. In doing so, he shifted society from instinct to reason, from chaos to predictable order. The code itself, etched meticulously into clay tablets, outlined offenses and their corresponding fines with clarity and precision. If a man caused injury to another, he would pay compensation commensurate with the damage. If property was stolen or damaged, restitution would be made. Even social hierarchies were acknowledged, with different penalties reflecting the status of the victim. Yet the underlying principle was universal. Crime could be reconciled through rational means, reducing cycles of violence and fostering social stability. Ur-Nammu's revolution extended beyond mere punishment. His laws were couched in moral and religious authority, declaring that justice was divinely sanctioned and that rulers had a sacred duty to uphold fairness. The prologue of the code reads as both a declaration and a promise. The king, guided by the gods, ensures that the weak are protected, that order is maintained, and that the city thrives under laws that transcend personal whims. In this way, law became a bridge between the mortal and the divine, a framework where human reason mirrored the cosmic order. The impact of Ur-Nammu's reforms was immediate and profound. By codifying penalties and establishing a predictable system, citizens gained a measure of security previously unavailable. Markets could operate with confidence, trade could expand, and disputes could be resolved without descending into cycles of bloodshed. The idea that society could function through shared rules rather than force alone was revolutionary, a concept that would echo through Mesopotamia and inspire future civilizations. Yet the significance of Ur-Nammu's code is not merely legal, it is philosophical. It reflects a society beginning to prioritize reason over instinct, planning over impulsive reaction, community over individual vengeance. Through his laws, Ur-Nammu taught that civilization thrives not when the strong dominate the weak, but when order and fairness bind a community together. Silver replaced blood, compensation replaced retaliation, and humanity took a step towards self-regulated governance. This revolution in justice laid the groundwork for subsequent codes, including those of Lipit Ishtar and the famous Code of Hammurabi. Each would expand, refine, and systematize the principles Ur-Nammu first enshrined. But it was in Ur that the crucial leap occurred, a city-state demonstrating that human society could rise above the raw instincts of survival, that law could be a tool of order, and that justice could be measured, rational, and enduring. As the sun set over the ziggurats of Ur, its golden light fell on streets where markets hummed and temples echoed with prayer. Here, civilization revealed its deeper ambition, not merely to survive, but to structure life itself through reason, morality, and law. Ur-Nammu's revolution marked the moment when justice began to transcend vengeance, a turning point in human history where law became the lifeblood of society, ensuring that fairness, not fear, would guide the generations yet to come. In the heart of the Sumerian city-state of Azin, around the 20th century BCE, a king rose with a vision that would echo through time. Lipit Ishtar, a ruler both pious and pragmatic, understood that law was more than a tool for governing people. It was a reflection of divine will. In an era when kingship and priesthood intertwined, Lipit Ishtar sought to unite the authority of the throne with the moral mandate of the gods, crafting a legal code that would carry both human and cosmic weight. The Code of Lipit Ishtar was a remarkable evolution of the Sumerian legal tradition. Following the footsteps of Urukagina and Ur-Nammu, he codified statutes governing property, marriage, inheritance, and debt. Yet his contribution went further. Each law was framed as a sacred duty, a commandment issued under the guidance of the gods. In the opening lines of the code, the king declares that he brings justice to the land to protect the weak, punish the wrongdoer, and ensure that divine order pervades human society. In this declaration, law becomes more than regulation. It becomes a bridge between heaven and earth, a tangible expression of moral and spiritual authority. Under Lipit Ishtar's mandate, kingship was inseparable from morality. The ruler was not a mere enforcer of rules, but a guarantor of cosmic balance. Priests, scribes, and judges acted under his supervision, interpreting and applying the law in ways that mirrored the order of the universe. Temples, often the centers of administration, became hubs where earthly and divine justice intersected, where decisions were imbued with spiritual significance. The laws themselves reflected a careful attention to social harmony. Disputes over land or property, conflicts among families, and even commercial disagreements were all subject to regulation that sought fairness, continuity, and predictability. Lipit Ishtar's code demonstrates remarkable sophistication of early Sumerian jurisprudence. It was not limited to punitive measures. It prescribed restitution, compensation, and protections for vulnerable members of society. Widows, orphans, and debtors were given explicit rights, reflecting a vision of justice that went beyond brute authority to embrace responsibility, equity, and communal stability. Justice in this context was both a shield and a compass, a system designed to guide human behavior while maintaining harmony between citizens and gods. The divine framing of law was also political strategy. By presenting statutes as decreed by the gods, Lipit Ishtar strengthened his legitimacy and reinforced social cohesion. Citizens were more likely to respect and obey rules they perceived as sacred, while challengers to the throne risked defying not just earthly authority, but the will of heaven itself. The king's words echoed across the city, inscribed on clay tablets, recited in temples, and memorized by scribes, a constant reminder that morality and power were entwined, and that the stability of society depended on adherence to both. Beyond the immediate effects, Lipit Ishtar's approach left an enduring imprint on Mesopotamian civilization. His synthesis of morality and law influenced subsequent rulers, most famously Hammurabi, whose code would elevate the concept of divinely sanctioned justice to monumental heights. Through these early Sumerian and Isin traditions, the idea emerged that human governance is inseparable from ethical responsibility, that law is not merely a tool of control, but a reflection of cosmic order. As the sun set over the temple towers of Isin, casting long shadows over bustling streets and marketplaces, it illuminated a city bound together not only by walls and commerce, but by shared principles of justice. Lipit Ishtar's legacy was a society in which law carried the weight of divinity, in which kings ruled not only with might, but with conscience, and in which the pursuit of fairness became a sacred mission. In this vision, humanity learned that civilization could be guided by more than survival and power. It could be guided by the enduring quest for justice, a quest that linked every mortal decision to the eternal order of the universe. Long before Babylon rose to legendary heights along the Euphrates, the foundations of civilization had already been laid in Sumer. From the fertile plains where Ur and Uruk flourished, a blueprint for society had emerged, a system of law, governance, religion, and culture that would echo across millennia. The achievements of Sumer were not isolated acts of brilliance. They were the inheritance that later empires would adopt, adapt, and magnify. The laws of Urukagina, Ur-Nammu, and Lipit Ishtar were more than rules for daily life. They were the first attempts to restrain human greed and arbitrariness, to place justice above the whims of the powerful. These early codes reflected a sophisticated understanding of society's need for order. Kings and priests, temples and scribes all worked in concert to maintain a balance between authority and the welfare of the people. When the Amorites later entered Mesopotamia and Babylon began to take shape, they did not discard this legacy. Instead, they absorbed it, weaving Sumerian principles into the very fabric of their own empire. Hammurabi, centuries later, would become the figure most associated with Mesopotamian law. Yet, his monumental code was not the invention of a single mind. It was the culmination of centuries of Sumerian thought. The principles were familiar: justice as compensation rather than vengeance, protection for the weak, and laws framed as divine commands. In this way, Sumer's early cities were the quiet architects of Babylon's power, even as the great city eclipsed their names in fame. Sumerian religion also left an indelible mark on Babylonian culture. Gods once worshipped in Ur and Eridu were reimagined. Inanna became Ishtar, Enki evolved into Ea, and Utu was known as Shamash. Myths, rituals, and sacred texts traveled seamlessly across time, carried on the lips of priests and inscribed in clay. Through these traditions, Babylon positioned itself as a rightful heir to an ancient and revered order, legitimizing its authority not merely through conquest, but through continuity with the divine cosmos. Economy and administration, too, reflected Sumerian ingenuity. Cuneiform writing, first developed to record trade and property, allowed Babylon to manage a sprawling empire with precision. The base 60 system, calendrical knowledge, and astronomical observations inherited from Sumer provided the framework for timekeeping, taxation, and civic planning. Sumer was the silent engine behind Babylon's rise. Its innovations had become the instruments of imperial power. Yet Sumer's influence extended beyond mere practicalities. The cultural and intellectual currents of its civilization rippled outward, shaping the art, literature, and worldview of the Near East. Epics of heroes, hymns of gods, and the earliest stories of human endeavor formed a shared narrative that Babylon could claim as its own. By standing on these foundations, Babylon did not erase Sumer. It amplified it, transforming the achievements of small city-states into the grandeur of empire. In the shadow of Babylon's walls, the memory of Sumer lived on. Every law inscribed in stone, every temple dedicated to the divine, and every clay tablet recording trade or story was a testament to the civilization that had first dared to imagine structured society, moral order, and lasting memory. Sumer's legacy was no longer confined to the mud-brick streets of Uruk or the ziggurats of Eridu. It had become immortal, embedded in the very identity of Babylon and all that followed. Through law, religion, and culture, Sumer had spoken across the centuries. Its wisdom, encoded in clay and ritual, became the cornerstone upon which the might of Babylon and the memory of the ancient world was built. The first cities had given rise to empire, and the vision of the earliest Sumerians endured, quietly shaping human civilization in ways that continue to resonate even today. Long before Babylon would rise to dominance, another empire blazed across Mesopotamia, carrying the torch of Sumerian civilization into a new era. Sargon of Akkad, a figure of ambition and vision, emerged from relative obscurity to unify the fragmented city-states of southern Mesopotamia. His conquest was not merely of land or people. It was a conquest of continuity, a deliberate effort to preserve and extend the achievements of Sumer. The city-states of Uruk, Lagash, and Eridu had flourished for centuries, each with its own governance, priesthoods, and traditions. Yet their independence had also made them vulnerable to conflict and instability. Sargon, through skillful strategy and unprecedented political foresight, forged these disparate centers into a single imperial entity, the world's first empire. In doing so, he transformed the scattered brilliance of Sumer into a coordinated power capable of enduring beyond the lifetime of any one ruler. But Sargon's empire was more than a military achievement. In administration, he inherited Sumerian methods of governance, adopting cuneiform for record-keeping, taxation, and correspondence. The bureaucratic genius of the Sumerians, honed in small city-states over centuries, became the framework for imperial control. Through tablets and scribes, the empire's reach extended across hundreds of miles, uniting cities under laws, trade regulations, and religious observances that had their roots in Sumer. Religion, too, remained a central pillar of Akkadian authority. Sumerian gods were not replaced but reimagined, their identities adapted into the Akkadian worldview. Inanna became Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, her temples continuing to anchor cities in both spiritual and civic life. Enki, the god of wisdom and waters, retained his cosmic influence, guiding the moral and practical decisions of kings and priests alike. By preserving the divine order of Sumer, Sargon ensured that the legitimacy of his rule was not only political but also sacred, linking empire to cosmos. The cultural inheritance of Sumer thrived under Akkad. The language of administration became bilingual, Akkadian for everyday governance, Sumerian for ceremonial, religious, and scholarly purposes. Epic tales, hymns, and myths continued to be copied, studied, and performed, allowing the memory of Sumer to survive within the machinery of empire. The story of Gilgamesh, first told in Uruk, now reached courts far beyond its city of origin, spreading the wisdom and imagination of the earliest civilization across the Near East. Sargon's empire also expanded trade and communication, connecting Mesopotamia with distant regions of Anatolia, the Zagros Mountains, and the Iranian Plateau. Sumerian techniques in irrigation, accounting, and urban planning were transported alongside goods and people, seeding the empire with the knowledge that had first transformed villages into cities. In this way, the Akkadian Empire became a living vessel for the Sumerian legacy, ensuring its survival even as its political identity was reshaped. Yet even as Akkad flourished, the Sumerian city-states did not vanish entirely. Uruk, and Lagash remained centers of worship, learning, and culture, their traditions woven seamlessly into the imperial fabric. Sargon's genius lay not in erasing the past, but in embracing it, recognizing that the strength of empire depended upon the civilization it inherited. The empire of Akkad stands in history not merely as a first conquest of territory, but as a conscious continuation of Sumerian civilization. Its greatness lay in synthesis, military might fused with culture, administration paired with religious authority, and innovation built upon tradition. In the hands of Sargon and his successors, the flame of Sumer burned brighter, illuminating a path that would guide Mesopotamia through centuries of kings, empires, and rebirth. In this way, the legacy of the first cities endured, proving that even in conquest, the past can survive, shape, and inspire the future. From the fertile plains once ruled by Sumerian city-states, a new power arose, destined to carry the mantle of civilization further than any before it. Babylon, a modest town on the banks of the Euphrates, blossomed into a symbol of authority, culture, and human ingenuity under the reign of Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE. Yet Babylon's greatness was not born in isolation. It was deeply rooted in the heritage of Sumer, a civilization whose law, art, and myth had already shaped the course of Mesopotamian history. Hammurabi understood the power of legacy. The laws of Uruk-agina, Ur-Nammu, and Lipit-Ishtar were not forgotten relics. They were the foundation upon which he built his monumental code. Carved into black diorite and displayed for all to see, the Code of Hammurabi declared that justice was not a private matter, but a public duty, a divine mission binding king and citizen alike. Every provision, from trade disputes to family obligations, reflected a continuity of thought stretching back to the first codifiers of fairness in Lagash. Babylon thus became both a preserver and an innovator, honoring tradition while elevating it into a political and moral masterpiece. The city itself mirrored this ambition. Massive walls rose to protect its inhabitants, temples soared skyward to honor the gods inherited from Sumer, and the Euphrates flowed through a city planned with astonishing precision. Ziggurats, both spiritual and civic centers, connected mortals with divine order, echoing the sacred architecture of Uruk and Eridu. Babylon's streets bustled with merchants, scribes, and artisans, all participating in a society that valued commerce, knowledge, and ritual, the hallmarks of the Sumerian urban model amplified on an imperial scale. Cultural memory thrived alongside governance. Sumerian myths, once localized tales of Inanna, Enki, and Gilgamesh, were transformed in Babylonian imagination. Inanna became Ishtar, a goddess of love, war, and cosmic authority. The Epic of Gilgamesh, first sung in the streets of Uruk, was rewritten and recopied, preserving stories of human ambition, mortality, and divine intervention. By maintaining these narratives, Babylon positioned itself as the inheritor of civilization itself, ensuring that the achievements of a vanished people continued to inspire awe and guide society. Writing, too, was a vital bridge between past and present. Cuneiform, initially developed for record-keeping in Sumer, became a tool of empire. Hammurabi's scribes used it to administer far-flung provinces, record monumental deeds, and inscribe treaties. The clay tablet was no longer just a ledger, it was an instrument of power, memory, and cultural cohesion. Through it, Sumer's intellectual legacy flowed seamlessly into the heart of Babylon, sustaining a civilization that now spanned hundreds of miles and countless communities. Trade and knowledge further cemented Babylon's place as the heir of Sumer. Irrigation techniques, agricultural innovations, and artistic methods traveled from the south to enrich the city's life. Scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, and divination, building upon principles first devised in Sumerian temples. Babylon, in essence, became a living museum of human achievement, a place where the past was not buried, but harnessed to create something greater, grander, and more enduring. In the rise of Babylon, we witness the remarkable continuity of civilization. Sumer did not vanish with the collapse of its city-states. It survived through empires that absorbed, adapted, and amplified its achievements. Hammurabi's Babylon transformed law into a symbol of order, architecture into a monument of power, and myth into a guide for human aspiration. Here, the flame of Sumer burned brighter than ever, illuminating a path for Mesopotamia that would endure for millennia, reminding humanity that greatness is never truly lost. It only awaits the hands capable of shaping it anew. Long after the ziggurats of Uruk and Ur rose against the sky, the influence of Sumer did not remain confined to the Euphrates and Tigris plains. It flowed outward, carried on the currents of rivers, the wheels of caravans, and the sails of riverboats, reaching lands far beyond the cradle of civilization. Sumerian thought, written in wedge-shaped cuneiform and imbued with law, religion, and commerce, became a thread weaving together the cultures of the ancient Near East. From the deserts of Elam to the mountains of Anatolia and the bustling cities of the Indus Valley, Sumer's imprint stretched across continents, shaping the destiny of peoples yet untouched by its first great cities. Merchants were the first vectors of this influence. Clay tablets, tokens, and cylinder seals traveled alongside grain, textiles, and pottery, carrying not only goods, but knowledge and conventions. In Elam, traders from Sumer introduced cuneiform symbols to record transactions, facilitating economic exchange with precision unknown before. Through these exchanges, rulers and merchants alike absorbed Sumerian concepts of accounting, standard measures, and legal contracts. A shared language of trade emerged, linking distant economies and laying the foundation for regional stability. But commerce was not the only conduit. Diplomatic missions and marriages between royal houses carried Sumerian administrative ideas and cultural norms into foreign courts. The art of governance, the division of labor, bureaucracy, and taxation, traveled in the wake of envoys and envoys' scribes. Kings in Anatolia studied clay tablets to emulate the meticulous organization of Sumerian city-states. Priests adopted rituals, festivals, and religious iconography that resonated with those first temples along the Tigris and Euphrates. Through diplomacy, Sumerian ideals became a model for civilized life, a standard against in which distant rulers measured their authority. Even farther afield, in the cities of the Indus Valley, echoes of Sumerian thought appear on archaeological finds. Cylinder seals, bearing motifs unmistakably Sumerian, have been unearthed at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, suggesting networks of trade and symbolic exchange that bridged thousands of kilometers. Though the languages differed, the principles of administration, writing, and ritual had traveled with the merchants, embedding Sumerian logic into the fabric of emerging civilizations. The Indus peoples may have borrowed ideas of measurement, weights, and record-keeping, creating parallel developments that hinted at a shared human drive toward order and communication. Religion and mythology also traveled alongside material culture. The Sumerian pantheon, with gods like Enlil, Inanna, and Enki, inspired local deities in neighboring lands. Myths of creation, floods, and divine intervention were retold, adapted, and absorbed into local cosmologies. Through these stories, Sumerian thought became both practical and philosophical, shaping laws, ethics, and human understanding of the cosmos far from the original city-states. This diffusion of knowledge was more than a transmission of ideas. It was a proof of civilization's reach. Sumer had become the first civilization whose influence transcended geography, planting seeds that would bloom in unexpected places. Trade routes, scribes, and religious rites acted as invisible highways, carrying human ingenuity into regions that had never seen the clay bricks of Ur or the canals of Lagash. Over centuries, these seeds took root, forming the scaffolding for empires and cultures across the Near East and South Asia. The story of Sumer's spread is a story of humanity itself, of how innovation, memory, and belief can travel across distances, survive generations, and shape distant societies. From the fertile plains of Mesopotamia to the distant banks of the Indus, Sumerian thought proved that ideas, once born, can travel farther than armies, survive longer than empires, and illuminate the path of human civilization for millennia to come. Long before telescopes pierced the night sky, before mechanical clocks measured hours with precision, the Sumerians lifted their gaze to the heavens. For them, The stars were not distant curiosities but guiding lights, a cosmic map that governed both the rhythms of the land and the lives of people below. The fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates demanded careful attention to seasonal change. Floods and harvests, planting and irrigation, all depended on an intimate understanding of time. It was in response to this necessity that the Sumerians began one of humanity's first systematic efforts to measure and order the cosmos. From these early observations emerged the division of the year into months and the months into days. The Sumerians tracked the moon's waxing and waning, creating a lunar calendar that dictated festivals, rituals, and agricultural cycles. These observations were carefully recorded on clay tablets, etched in cuneiform, preserving a celestial knowledge that would endure for millennia. Their calendars were not merely tools of convenience. They were instruments that aligned human society with the rhythms of the universe, embedding a sense of order into both labor and devotion. Yet the Sumerians did not stop at observing the cycles of the moon and sun. They invented the sexagesimal, or base 60 system, dividing hours into 60 minutes and minutes into 60 seconds. This conceptual leap, the abstraction of time into units smaller than a day, was revolutionary. It allowed for precise scheduling, coordinated trade, and accurate recording of astronomical events. These divisions were so effective that they persisted far beyond Sumer, passed down to the Babylonians, and ultimately becoming the structure of modern clocks, a testament to the enduring brilliance of Sumerian thought. Astronomy in Sumer was inseparable from religion. Celestial bodies re not only markers of time, but symbols of divine power. The movements of planets and stars were interpreted as messages from the gods, guiding kings and priests in decisions both political and spiritual. Temples served as observatories, ziggurats reaching skyward as platforms from which the heavens could be studied. By linking the celestial and the terrestrial, Sumerian astronomers ensured that human action remained in harmony with the greater cosmic order, blending science and faith in a union that would shape all future Near Eastern civilizations. Their meticulous observations allowed the Sumerians to predict seasonal flooding, schedule planting, and regulate the flow of rivers through canals, all critical to sustaining the dense populations of their burgeoning city-states. Festivals were timed to celestial cycles, connecting the lives of ordinary people with the eternal dance of stars. In this way, Sumerian astronomy was both practical and philosophical, a bridge between survival and meaning, utility and wonder. The legacy of these early skywatchers extended far beyond Mesopotamia. Babylonian scholars refined Sumerian observations, and through them, Greek astronomers inherited a system of time and measurement that continues to influence us today. When we glance at our watches, when we divide hours into minutes and minutes into seconds, we are unwittingly tracing a path back to the fertile plains where humanity first looked skyward with curiosity, awe, and purpose. In measuring the heavens, the Sumerians measured themselves. They transformed the chaotic passage of time into a structured order that allowed cities to flourish, commerce to expand, and human knowledge to accumulate. The stars, once distant and unknowable, became the first instruments of civilization, and in every tick of our modern clock, we hear the faint echo of Sumer's pioneering gaze toward Eterni. Long before the written word carried tales across continents, before empires codified history into stone and clay, the Sumerians wove stories that sought to explain the mysteries of life, death, and the cosmos. In the city-states of Uruk, Ur, and Eridu, myths were more than entertainment. They were maps of understanding, guiding humanity through the uncertainties of existence. Through these stories, the Sumerians explored creation, mortality, divine power, and the delicate balance between humans and the gods, ideas that would ripple across civilizations for millennia. At the heart of Sumerian myth was Enki, the god of wisdom and water, whose intelligence and cunning often shaped the fate of humanity. Enki was the mediator between divine will and human need. crafting life from clay and ensuring that knowledge and order reached humankind. In the tales of creation, humans were not born merely by chance. They were formed intentionally, sculpted to serve, labor, and flourish under the guidance of the gods. These narratives conveyed profound truths: that life is fragile, that wisdom is a precious gift, and that survival often depends on insight and humility before forces greater than oneself. Perhaps the most enduring of Sumerian stories is the Great Flood, recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Here, the gods, displeased with humanity, unleash a deluge meant to wipe all life from the earth. Only a chosen few survive, building vessels to preserve themselves and the seeds of civilization. This tale, first inscribed on clay tablets in cuneiform, transcended its time and place. Centuries later, echoes of the flood appear in the Bible's story of Noah, in Greek legends, and in myths across the Near East, carrying forward lessons about divine judgment, human resilience, and the hope of renewal after catastrophe. Gilgamesh himself embodies the Sumerian exploration of mortality and ambition. King and hero, he confronts death, seeks eternal life, and learns that wisdom, compassion, and the legacy of civilization are the true markers of human achievement. His epic was copied, adapted, and preserved by Babylonians and Assyrians, spreading far beyond Sumer's borders. In every line, we glimpse a civilization grappling with the same eternal questions that continue to haunt humanity. How should we live? What is the meaning of death? How do humans shape their destiny under the gaze of powers beyond comprehension? These myths were never static. They evolved alongside the cultures that inherited them. In Babylon, Sumerian deities were recast, stories rewritten, yet the core wisdom endured. In Greece, echoes of these tales influenced hero myths, moral parables, and epic poetry. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, fragments of Sumerian thought, from divine creation to cosmic floods, survived in sacred scripture. Through these transmissions, the Sumerians ensured that their understanding of human nature, morality, and the divine remained alive, shaping ethical imagination long after their language and city-states had vanished. What is remarkable is that these myths were not only spiritual or moral lessons, they were also reflections of Sumerian reality. Floods, droughts, and the caprices of the Tigris and Euphrates shaped the landscape and the psyche of a people who had learned to live in delicate balance with nature. Every tale of divine wrath, every story of heroism, encapsulated both observation and imagination, turning history into narrative and experience into moral compass. The myths of Sumer endure because they spoke to universal truths. They remind humanity that civilization is fragile, that knowledge is precious, and that moral imagination is as necessary as survival. From the clay tablets of Uruk to the pages of the Bible and the verses of Homer, the stories first whispered in Sumerian cities continue to resonate. They are a testament to the power of narrative, a bridge across millennia, proving that while empires may rise and fall, the human need to tell stories, to explain our place in the universe, is eternal. The city of Ur had stood for centuries as a jewel of Sumer, a place where ziggurats reached toward the heavens, where scribes recorded history in wet clay, and where the pulse of civilization echoed through bustling streets and sacred temples. It was a city of kings and priests, of merchants and artisans, a symbol of human ambition and ingenuity. Yet, like all things in the ever-shifting currents of history, Ur was not eternal. The twilight of Sumer had begun, and with it, the last chapter of a civilization that had shaped the world. The forces that would end Ur's dominance were both natural and human. Droughts and changing river patterns strained the agricultural heart of the city, reducing harvests and undermining the very foundation of life along the Tigris and Euphrates. Fields once fertile became parched, canals silted, and the delicate balance that had sustained Ur's prosperity began to unravel. At the same time, waves of Amorite nomads, semi-nomadic groups from the west, moved into Mesopotamia. Initially, they were seen as outsiders, a peripheral presence along the city's borders. But over time, they integrated, learned the ways of Sumer, and steadily amassed influence. The collapse of Ur was neither sudden nor dramatic. It was a gradual erosion of power. Kings could no longer command the loyalty of distant provinces. Temple authorities struggled to maintain economic control, and the social fabric frayed under the pressures of scarcity and change. Once thriving districts fell silent, workshops closed, and canals lay neglected. The city that had once symbolized the heights of urban organization, learning, and faith became a shadow of its former self, its streets echoing with the ghosts of past triumphs. Yet, even in decline, Ur's legacy endured. The knowledge, laws, and traditions cultivated over centuries did not vanish overnight. Sumerian culture was absorbed into the growing influence of the Amorites, who, though different in language and custom, recognized the value of what they inherited. The gods of Sumer, Inanna, Enki, Enlil, were adopted into the pantheon of emerging powers. Temples continued to function, and the scribes' clay tablets ensured that memory outlived the walls. Civilization, though shifting in form, remained anchored to the foundation Sumer had built. The fall of Ur also marked a turning point for the region. As Sumerian dominance faded, new powers began to emerge, culminating in the rise of Babylon. The Amorites, once outsiders, now became kings, establishing dynasties that would carry forward the administrative, religious, and cultural achievements of the Sumerians. Hammurabi's later empire, with its codified laws and monumental architecture, would not have been possible without the innovations first nurtured in the city-states of Sumer. In this sense, the collapse of Ur was not an end, but a transformation, a passing of the torch from one era of civilization to the next. Archaeologically, the ruins of Ur today tell the story of both grandeur and fragility. Excavations reveal streets, temples, and tombs, rich with artifacts of gold, silver, and lapis lazuli, alongside signs of abandonment and decay. These remnants serve as a stark reminder that even the most advanced societies are subject to the inexorable forces of nature, human ambition, and time itself. Ur's story is both caution and inspiration. A civilization that achieved greatness yet succumbed to impermanence, leaving behind lessons inscribed in stone and memory. The fall of Ur, then, is more than the story of a city. It is the twilight of Sumerian power, the fading of the first civilization whose ideas, law, and culture would echo for millennia. In its demise, we witness the resilience of legacy, how knowledge and innovation can survive the collapse of kingdoms, shaping the dawn of new empires and the future of human history. As Ur crumbled into dust, the stage was set for Babylon, and the enduring story of Mesopotamia continued ever onward upon the foundations laid by the Sumerians. From the arid plains and shifting sands of the west came the Amorites, a people of mobility and resilience, unbound by the rigid city walls of the settled world. At first they were outsiders, observers of a civilization whose cities, Ur, Uruk, Lagash, gleamed with permanence, law, and culture. The Sumerians had built an intricate society, yet the Amorites, drawn by the promise of fertile lands and opportunity, began to enter Mesopotamia not as conquerors, but as seekers of survival, settlement, and integration. It was in this meeting of nomad and city dweller that history pivoted. The Amorites did not immediately overthrow Sumerian institutions, rather, they absorbed them. They learned the language of administration, adopted the gods who had shaped Sumerian thought, and studied the complex systems of irrigation, trade, and governance that had turned river valleys into thriving city-states. In doing so, they became the unexpected custodians of a culture far older and more sophisticated than their own. The very traditions they once encountered as strangers became the blueprint for their ascent to power. Among the Amorites, new leaders emerged, pragmatic, ambitious, and adept at navigating the delicate balance between inheritance and innovation. They married into Sumerian elite families, assumed administrative roles, and gradually asserted control over territories once dominated by the fading city-states. Their rise was measured and deliberate, marked by a careful blend of reverence for tradition and assertive ambition. By embracing Sumerian religion, the Amorites not only legitimized their rule, but also ensured continuity in a world where the favor of the gods was intertwined with the right to govern. Inanna became Ishtar, Enki became Ea, yet the divine mandate remained, a thread linking the fading Sumerian past to the emergent Amorite present. The Amorites' strength lay not only in their adaptability, but in their vision. They understood that power demanded both cultural continuity and territorial cohesion. Where Sumer had built city-states and relied on fragmented leadership, the Amorites began consolidating control, forging networks of cities under unified authority. They recognized the importance of trade, of connecting riverside settlements to deserts, mountains, and distant markets. They preserved Sumerian writing, using it to administer new lands and record transactions, law and myth, transforming cuneiform from a local tool into the instrument of a rising imperial order. Yet the rise of the Amorites was not without tension. Indigenous Sumerians sometimes resisted, wary of outsiders who had once been mere wanderers. Social and cultural frictions simmered, demanding careful navigation by leaders who needed to maintain stability while asserting their growing dominance. Through diplomacy, strategic marriages, and respect for existing religious institutions, the Amorites gradually wove themselves into the fabric of Mesopotamian life. Over time, they became less the foreign interlopers and more the inheritors of a civilization that stretched back millennia. This careful synthesis of tradition and innovation set the stage for Babylon. The Amorites laid the foundations of what would become one of history's most legendary cities, a place where the laws, myths, and administrative genius of Sumer were elevated into monumental form. Hammurabi would later take the reins, codifying law and order across a unified kingdom, but it was the Amorites who preserved and transmitted the cultural and spiritual wealth of Sumer, ensuring that the flame of civilization did not flicker out with the last kings of Ur. The story of the Amorites is, in essence, a story of cultural guardianship. Nomads of the desert became stewards of memory, bridging the gap between the first dawn of cities and the rise of empires. By adopting the gods, learning the scripts, and respecting the inherited wisdom of the land, they transformed displacement into legacy. From the ruins of Ur to the streets of a burgeoning Babylon, the Amorites carried forward the Sumerian heritage, proving that the survival of a civilization is not always in conquest alone, but in understanding, adaptation, and the quiet patience to build upon the past. In the end, the Amorites' rise was both a continuation and a renewal, a testament to the resilience of culture, and a prelude to the glory of Babylon, where the echoes of Sumer would resonate for centuries to come. The story of the Sumerians is not one of sudden collapse, but of a quiet fading, a civilization slipping gradually from the stage of history, leaving behind ruins and whispers in the wind. Their great cities, once vibrant with life and song, became silent. Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and Eridu, the marvels of human ingenuity, were slowly abandoned. Mud-brick walls crumbled under the relentless sun, canals silted over, and marketplaces once teeming with traders fell still. What had been the heartbeat of civilization now became a memory written in dust and stone. Language, the very vessel of their thought, became the first casualty. Sumerian, once the lingua franca of administration, commerce, and religion, no longer passed from tongue to tongue. Its cuneiform signs survived only in temple records and scholarly scribbles, like an echo of a song no longer sung. By the time Babylon rose and Akkadian dominated daily life, Sumerian had become a language of ritual and scholarship, a ghostly heritage preserved only by those who revered the past. The name Sumer itself disappeared from political records, replaced by the labels of Akkad and Babylon. Generations grew up knowing the monuments without understanding the people who had built them, seeing temples and ziggurats as relics rather than the creations of their forebears. Yet disappearance is never total. Though the Sumerians vanished in form, their legacy endured, carried forward by the peoples who inherited their world. The Amorites, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians all absorbed fragments of Sumerian culture. The laws that balanced power with fairness, the myths that wrestled with creation, the administrative wisdom that tamed rivers and cities. Sumer's innovations in writing, governance, and science did not die with its people. They became the foundation stones upon which Mesopotamia built its empires. In many ways, the Sumerians lived on in the rhythms of daily life long after they were gone. The base 60 mathematics that structured commerce and astronomy continued under Babylonian scholars. The lunisolar calendars guided planting and ritual, and the epics of Gilgamesh echoed in the stories of gods, kings, and floods across the Near East. Each Babylonian decree, each Assyrian tablet, carried traces of Sumerian thought, a civilization folded into the memory of those who followed. Their influence reached even further, seeding ideas that would appear in the Bible, Greek myths, and distant cultures whose inhabitants would never know the name of their originators. Archaeology would, thousands of years later, awaken the memory of Sumer. When explorers and scholars began excavating the mounds of Uruk, Ur, and Lagash in the 19th century, they uncovered a buried world of clay tablets, temples, and tombs. The treasures of Leonard Woolley's excavations, golden lyres, intricate jewelry, and monumental tombs revealed a society of astonishing complexity and beauty. Through these discoveries, the Sumerians returned from obscurity, not as conquerors or rulers, but as the architects of civilization itself. Their cities had fallen, their names had vanished, yet their spirit, the ambition, creativity, and organization that first shaped human society, endured. The death of Sumer was not an end, but a transformation. They passed into history like a river flowing beneath the sands, invisible yet shaping everything above it. Every law carved into clay, every tablet of writing, every temple's shadowed corridor became part of the blueprint for future civilizations. Through Babylon, Assyria, and beyond, the Sumerians whispered across time, reminding humanity that no culture ever truly dies if its ideas, its innovations, and its imagination live on. In this silence, the Sumerians achieve a kind of immortality. They became the invisible architects of the civilizations that followed, their cities crumbled, but their vision enduring. Even as the desert claimed their streets and the wind erased their footprints, the Sumerians remained, not in form, but in legacy. And in that enduring legacy, the story of civilization itself continues, echoing the first leap humanity ever took into the conscious shaping of history. For more than 3,000 years, the world forgot Sumer. Its cities, once bustling with life, lay silent beneath layers of sand and sediment, mute witnesses to a civilization that had once dared to shape the future. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, names that once rang with power and innovation, survived only as mounds, tells, rising faintly above the Mesopotamian plain. Travelers and local shepherds passed over them, perhaps noting the scattered bricks and fallen walls, yet unaware that beneath their feet lay the cradle of civilization. The knowledge of Sumer's existence faded as languages shifted, empires rose and fell, and history was recorded by those who knew only the present. Akkadian replaced Sumerian in everyday speech. Babylonian scribes copied their myths in a language that obscured the origins of the stories, and the names of the first kings were lost in the tide of time. The temples that once echoed with prayers to Inanna, Enlil, and Enki crumbled to dust, their ziggurats reduced to heaps of sun-baked brick. Without writing to keep memory alive, the stories of humanity's earliest cities were swallowed by centuries of neglect. Even myths endured only partially, stripped of their original context. The flood of Gilgamesh, the adventures of gods and heroes, and the creation of humankind from clay survived in distorted forms, absorbed into Babylonian epics and later referenced in biblical tales. The names of Sumerian gods changed. Inanna became Ishtar, Enki became Ea, Utu became Shamash, masking the civilization that had birthed them. The achievements of writing, law, and urban life became so intertwined with the cultures that inherited them that their Sumerian roots were all but invisible. Yet the remnants of Sumer remained, quietly asserting their presence. Broken cuneiform tablets, scattered cylinder seals, and fragments of monumental architecture endured, carrying whispers of a world long vanished. For the curious eye, these artifacts hinted at the extraordinary. A people who had built the first cities, invented writing, codified laws, and observed the heavens with meticulous care. To the casual observer, these were simply ancient ruins. To the historian and archaeologist, they were clues to a civilization erased from memory, waiting to be understood. The sands of Mesopotamia, indifferent to human pride and conquest, became both tomb and protector. They shielded Sumer's legacy from the ravages of time, preserving it until the age of exploration and scientific archaeology. Centuries passed, empires and dynasties rose and fell, and the story of Sumer became a legend without a name, a shadow of achievement whose light had dimmed. Yet even in its silence, the civilization's influence persisted invisibly, coursing through the legal codes of Babylon, the myths of surrounding cultures, and the foundations of urban society across the Near East. It would take the 19th century, the hands of European explorers and scholars, to bring Sumer back from oblivion. But during those long-forgotten millennia, humanity lived in a world unknowingly shaped by the achievements of a vanished people. Their inventions, writing, law, city planning, and cosmic observation, flowed through time like hidden rivers, influencing distant societies long after the builders themselves had disappeared. The story of the forgotten millennia is a story of silence, of absence, yet also of endurance. Sumer had vanished, yet it had never truly gone. Beneath the desert, beneath the memory of empires and the passing of centuries, the legacy of the first civilization waited patiently, like a seed beneath the soil, ready to be rediscovered, ready to remind the world that the dawn of history had once been illuminated by human hands, clay tablets, and the whisper of gods. And when, at last, the excavators arrived with their tools and brushes, the millennia of forgetting began to lift, revealing Sumer in all its hidden splendor, the civilization that had shaped the very foundations of the world we know today. For millennia, Sumer slept beneath the sands of Mesopotamia, a civilization erased from living memory. Its cities, once vibrant with commerce, worship, and law, lay silent and unremarkable to the casual observer. Uruk, Ur, and Lagash were no more than dusty mounds, their monumental bricks crumbled, their streets invisible under centuries of wind and soil. Yet the story of humanity's first civilization was not lost forever. In the 19th century, driven by curiosity and ambition, a new generation of explorers and archaeologists began peeling back the layers of history, uncovering a world that had been hidden for thousands of years. The early excavations were cautious, driven initially by a desire to locate the lands mentioned in the Bible. European scholars and adventurers arrived in Mesopotamia, treading carefully across the plains of southern Iraq. At first, they discovered only fragments, broken bricks, inscribed clay, and the faint remains of temples. But then came the revelations that would astonish the world. Clay tablets etched with wedge-shaped marks, entirely unlike any known writing system, began to emerge. These were cuneiform, the language of a people who had lived 5 millennia before the present, recording laws, myths, and the transactions of daily life. With every tablet unearthed, the scope of Sumerian achievement became clearer. Archaeologists like Austin Henry Layard and later Leonard Woolley began uncovering the royal tombs of Ur, filled with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, musical instruments, jewelry, and the remnants of rituals long forgotten. These were not mere graves. They were treasure troves of culture, a vivid testament to a civilization that had combined art, religion, and governance into a complex urban society. The grandeur of the ziggurats, the sophistication of the craftwork, and the precision of administrative records revealed a people whose intelligence and creativity rivaled any civilization that came after. The discovery of Sumer forced historians to reconsider the origins of civilization itself. Egypt, long thought to be the cradle of organized society, now shared its claim with a people who had constructed cities, developed writing, codified laws, and observed the heavens centuries earlier. Scholars realized that the myths, epics, and legal codes long attributed to Babylon were, in many cases, adaptations of Sumerian originals. The Epic of Gilgamesh, once assumed to be purely Babylonian, was traced back to Sumerian storytellers who had inscribed their legends on clay tablets thousands of years before Hammurabi's famous code. Every find deepened the mystery of Sumer. Cylinder seals, small yet exquisitely detailed, depicted scenes of gods, rituals, and daily life, offering glimpses into the spiritual and social fabric of the first cities. Administrative tablets detailed trade, debts, and the management of temples and palaces, demonstrating a level of bureaucratic sophistication that seemed almost modern. In every corner, from the tombs of kings to the clay tablets of scribes, the evidence painted a picture of a civilization that had vanished, yet left traces that could still speak across time. The rediscovery of Sumer was more than an archaeological triumph. It was a rewriting of human history. Humanity learned that civilization did not begin with Egypt or Babylon, but earlier, with a people whose ambition, intellect, and artistry had laid the foundations for all that followed. Sumer had been forgotten, but the sand could not erase memory forever. Its cities, its writing, its laws, and its myths endured, waiting for the hands of explorers to restore them to life. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the world could no longer ignore Sumer. The civilization that had slept beneath the desert for millennia now stood revealed, a testament to human ingenuity, a bridge between prehistory and history, and a reminder that even the greatest civilizations can be lost, only to be found again by those who dare to look. The return of Sumer was not just the uncovering of bricks and tablets, but the awakening of a forgotten human story, one that continues to echo through time, teaching us that history is never as final as it seems, and that even silence can carry the weight of a civilization's voice. In the 1920s, the desert sands of southern Iraq whispered secrets long buried beneath millennia of silence. Leonard Woolley, a British archaeologist driven by curiosity and an unyielding sense of wonder, began excavating the ancient city of Ur, one of the most magnificent urban centers of Sumer. What he found would astonish the world and revive the memory of a civilization thought lost forever. Beneath layers of soil and ruin lay the royal tombs, silent yet radiant, waiting to tell their story of power, devotion, and artistry. Woolley's excavation revealed more than graves. It uncovered entire worlds enclosed within carefully constructed chambers. Gold and silver gleamed in the dim light of the desert. Intricately crafted jewelry adorned the skeletons of kings and queens, and lapis lazuli, carnelian and precious stones traced patterns of wealth and symbolism. Musical instruments, including lyres and drums, suggested a culture where art was woven seamlessly into life and ritual, and even the dead were accompanied by melodies that perhaps once rang through the palaces of Ur. The royal tombs were arranged with meticulous precision, reflecting a society deeply aware of hierarchy and the divine. The kings and queens, laid to rest with attendants and retainers, were honored as both rulers and intermediaries with the gods. Each object, from the delicate cups to the ceremonial daggers, conveyed meaning, not merely luxury, but an intricate language of power, religion, and identity. The tombs spoke of a civilization that saw death not as an end, but as a continuation of status and ritual, where earthly and spiritual realms intertwined. Among the treasures were cylinder seals, tiny yet complex, depicting scenes of gods, offerings, and celestial symbols. Each seal was a microcosm of Sumerian society, commerce, devotion, and the divine captured in minute detail. These artifacts revealed a people who were meticulous recorders of their own existence, understanding that legacy could be preserved in objects and symbols just as power could be preserved in stone and clay. The scale of the tombs themselves was breathtaking. Woolley uncovered elaborate subterranean chambers, some requiring long corridors and staircases descending into the earth, each lined with the remains of those who had once served the royal household. The organization of these spaces reflected not only reverence for the deceased, but also an extraordinary administrative and engineering skill. Sumerians had combined their mastery of architecture with ritual, creating tombs that were as functional as they were symbolic, shelters for both memory and myth. Through the discovery of Ur's royal tombs, Sumer revealed itself not as a distant myth, but as a civilization of sophistication, spirituality, and refinement. It was a society that had mastered metalwork, music, art, and architecture, producing beauty that could endure millennia. Each object, each skeleton, each tablet whispered stories of devotion, ambition, and the human desire to leave a mark beyond the limits of a single lifetime. These tombs also illuminated the connection between life and death in Sumerian thought. The wealth and grandeur buried with the dead were not mere displays of power. They were offerings to ensure favor in the afterlife, to maintain harmony with the gods, and to perpetuate memory. In this, the people of Ur expressed a profound understanding. Civilization is not only built upon structures and law, but upon belief, ritual, and the desire to reach beyond mortality. The royal tombs of Ur became a revelation, a resurrection of a lost civilization's soul. Woolley's discoveries forced the modern world to acknowledge the grandeur, ingenuity, and artistry of the Sumerians. Through gold, music, and stone, Sumer spoke once more, reminding humanity that even civilizations buried in time can rise again, whispering their stories to those willing to listen, and that greatness, once achieved, leaves an imprint that not even millennia can erase. For centuries, Sumer has been hailed as the cradle of civilization, a place where writing, cities, and law first emerged from the dust of prehistory. Yet as archaeologists and historians expanded their gaze, a more complex picture began to emerge. Across the globe, other cultures were taking their own extraordinary steps toward organized society. Along the Nile, Egypt was uniting under the first pharaohs, building monumental temples and tombs, and developing hieroglyphs that recorded deeds and divinity. In the Indus Valley, cities such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa boasted intricate drainage systems, fired brick houses, and urban planning that rivaled anything in Mesopotamia. Far to the east, in the valleys of China, the Liangshan culture and later the Shang dynasty were forging metallurgy, ancestor worship, and early forms of writing. Each of these civilizations, independent yet parallel, demonstrated humanity's capacity for complexity long before the age of empires. Sumer's claim to primacy rests on two pillars: the earliest known system of writing and the city-state model. By 3200 BCE, Uruk may have housed tens of thousands of people, with monumental architecture, temples, and marketplaces, a population and organization unparalleled for its time. Cuneiform allowed Sumerians to record contracts, transactions, hymns, and laws, transforming memory into text and turning fleeting events into history. Other early societies certainly produced symbols and proto-writing, but nowhere else is there comparable evidence of a fully developed, enduring system of literacy capable of shaping law, economy, and administration across generations. Yet the notion of first is inevitably shaped by perspective. For much of modern history, Western archaeology focused on Mesopotamia and Egypt, creating a narrative where Sumer emerged as the definitive starting point of civilization. Only later did the achievements of the Indus Valley, China, and other regions come into view, revealing a world where multiple centers of innovation arose independently, each with its own unique character and contributions. Civilization, it seems, did not follow a single linear path, but a web of interwoven developments, where ideas, trade, and experimentation moved across continents and rivers alike. The question, then, is not simply chronological, but conceptual. What defines civilization? Is it writing, cities, law, religion, technology? Sumer exemplified these traits at a remarkable scale and early date. But it was part of a broader story of humanity, pushing against the limits of survival and imagination. Each society faced its own challenges, adapting to geography, climate, and resources, and each developed structures that allowed memory, law, and culture to endure beyond individual lifetimes. Despite these parallels, Sumer's influence resonates with particular clarity. Its innovations spread through Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria, shaping not only the Near East, but eventually leaving traces in Greek, Roman, and modern thought. Writing, law, astronomical observation, and the city-state model radiated outward like ripples across a still pond, amplifying Sumer's legacy far beyond its borders. Yet this does not diminish the achievements of contemporaneous civilizations. It only underscores the extraordinary fact that humanity's first steps toward history were never isolated, but part of a global awakening. In this light, Sumer is both singular and shared. It was the civilization we remember first, not necessarily the only one. Its cities, kings, scribes, and temples form a lens through which we can glimpse the very moment humanity dared to preserve its memory, to impose order upon chaos, and to believe that society could endure beyond the fleeting span of individual life. Sumer may not have been the absolute beginning, but it was the clearest bridge from prehistory into history, a mirror reflecting a broader story of human ingenuity unfolding across the planet. And so, as we compare the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow River, and the Tigris-Euphrates, we see not a competition for primacy, but a chorus of civilizations, each rising, experimenting, and remembering, giving shape to the age of history and leaving humanity the remarkable inheritance we still study, explore, and marvel at today. Long after the clay tablets were inscribed and the ziggurats had fallen silent, the gods of Sumer continued to captivate human imagination. Among them, the Anunnaki stood as powerful arbiters of fate, celestial figures who shaped the destinies of kings and commoners alike. To the Sumerians, these were divine beings, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, whose whims could bless or curse the harvest, dictate war, or grant wisdom. Yet, in the modern era, a startling reinterpretation of these ancient myths emerged, one that stretched the bounds of imagination and provoked both fascination and controversy. Some scholars and writers claimed that the Anunnaki were not merely gods, but visitors from distant worlds, extraterrestrial beings who descended to Earth and in doing so elevated humanity from primitive survival to advanced knowledge. This idea gained traction most famously through the writings of Zecharia Sitchin in the late 20th century. Interpreting Sumerian texts through a lens of speculative astronomy and alternative history, Sitchin argued that the rapid advancements of the Sumerians, writing, law, agriculture, monumental architecture, and astronomy, were too sudden, too precise to have been created by humans alone. In this narrative, the Anunnaki came from a distant planet called Nibiru, and humanity's earliest leaps into civilization were the result of instruction, genetic manipulation, or direct guidance from these alien patrons. The temples, ziggurats, and city walls became more than feats of engineering. They were, in this telling, markers of celestial influence. The theory is both compelling and controversial. On one hand, it captures a deep human desire, the need to explain sudden genius and unfathomable achievement. The Sumerians, after all, built cities housing tens of thousands, recorded laws and economic transactions with astonishing precision, and charted the heavens in ways that would influence generations to come. To imagine that such feats might have come with external aid is to connect ancient history with the modern fascination for space, the unknown, and the possibility of life beyond Earth. On the other hand, mainstream archaeology and history caution against conflating myth with literal extraterrestrial intervention. The achievements of the Sumerians, remarkable as they were, can be explained through environmental necessity, human ingenuity, and centuries of incremental development. Surviving records show the Sumerians learning from trade, from neighboring peoples, and from the challenges posed by the unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates. Their gods, including the Anunnaki, were symbolic expressions of forces beyond their control, floods, droughts, and celestial events, rather than literal visitors from other worlds. Yet the enduring allure of the Anunnaki hypothesis is not in its academic credibility, but in its narrative power. It transforms the dry study of clay tablets into a story of cosmic intrigue, of humanity standing at the threshold of the stars, guided by beings from beyond. In science fiction, in documentaries, and in popular culture, the Anunnaki become mirrors for our own curiosity, ambition, and longing for transcendence. The myth, reborn through modern lenses, bridges the ancient and contemporary, turning history into a canvas for imagination. Ultimately, the Anunnaki teach us about humanity as much as they do about Sumer. They remind us that myth is a language for the profound questions we cannot yet answer. Where did we come from? Why do we excel? What powers shape the course of our lives? By exploring both the historical and speculative, we recognize that Sumer was not only the birthplace of civilization, but also the birthplace of wonder, the first society to place human existence in dialogue with the cosmos. In the stories of the Anunnaki, we glimpse the eternal human desire to reach beyond our own world, to search the heavens for meaning, to see the unknown reflected in the familiar, and to imagine that the story of civilization is also the story of something larger than ourselves. Long after the clay tablets crumbled and the ziggurats were reclaimed by the shifting sands, the story of Sumer endured, not only in ruins, but in memory, myth, and imagination. The people of this ancient land, who first shaped cities, codified law, and charted the heavens, left more than artifacts. They left a template for how humanity understands itself and the cosmos. Their myths of Enlil, Enki, Inanna, and the Anunnaki were not merely religious stories, but reflections of human attempts to explain the forces shaping life, to place order on a chaotic world, and to grapple with the mysteries of existence. Through these narratives, the Sumerians created a bridge between the known and the unknown, a story that would echo across millennia. Memory, however, is fragile. For thousands of years, Sumer was forgotten. Its name vanished from daily speech, and its cities lay silent beneath dust and desert. Yet the stories did not die. They survived in adaptation, translation, and reinvention. The epics of Gilgamesh were preserved in Babylonian copies, echoes of the original Sumerian songs. The Great Flood, as recounted in the clay tablets, later appeared in the Bible, in Greek legends, and in cultures far beyond Mesopotamia. What the Sumerians had written and imagined continued to shape human consciousness long after their civilization itself had faded. In the modern era, imagination sought to reclaim and reinterpret Sumer. The Anunnaki were no longer confined to myth. They became the stars of science fiction, the subjects of speculative history, and the symbols of humanity's enduring curiosity about the unknown. Writers and theorists imagined extraterrestrial architects guiding the first steps of civilization, connecting ancient ingenuity to cosmic possibilities. Though these interpretations are debated, they reveal something fundamental: that Sumer's story is a mirror, reflecting humanity's own desire to reach beyond itself, to understand origins, and to make sense of brilliance that seems almost otherworldly. The intertwining of myth and memory demonstrates the profound human need to narrate existence. Myths were never simply fiction. They were early attempts to explain the unexplainable, to encode morality, and to connect the finite human life to the vast rhythms of nature and the cosmos. In every flood myth, every tale of divine intervention, and every heroic epic, we see Sumerian imagination at work, grappling with questions that remain central today. How should humans live? How do we relate to forces beyond our control? What is our place in the universe? Sumer's legacy, therefore, is not measured solely in bricks, tablets, or laws. It is found in the act of remembering itself, in writing, storytelling, and the eternal dialogue between past and present. When humanity tells the story of the Anunnaki, of the first cities, or of gods shaping kings, we are engaging in the same exercise that the Sumerians began 5,000 years ago, transforming memory into narrative, chaos into order, and the fleeting into the enduring. Through myth, Sumer becomes more than a civilization. It becomes a lens through which we understand the human imagination. It reminds us that history is not merely a record of events, but a canvas for reflection, for wonder, and for the questions that no era can fully answer. Each generation interprets these ancient stories anew, and in doing so, keeps the conversation between humanity and the cosmos alive. The brilliance of Sumer lies not only in what they built, wrote, or imagined, but in what they inspired: the courage to record memory, to tell stories that transcend time, and to seek meaning in the vast unknown. From sacred temples to modern science fiction, from clay tablets to the night sky, the story of Sumer endures, a testament to the power of myth, memory, and the human imagination to illuminate the darkness of forgotten ages. Long after the last ziggurat crumbled and the voices of Sumer faded into silence, their civilization continued to live, not in monuments or in daily speech, but in the structures of human thought, in the tools of society, and in the enduring act of memory itself. Sumer was the first to take the raw elements of survival, water, clay, and labor, and transform them into the frameworks of civilization. They taught humanity that society could be organized, that order could rise from chaos, and that the lives of ordinary people could be preserved through law, writing, and record. Theirs was not a fleeting achievement. It was a seed planted in the very soil of history, destined to grow in forms they could scarcely have imagined. Every time we write a word, we echo the Sumerians' first impressions on clay tablets, every hour measured on a clock, every circle traced in geometry, every contract signed in ink carries the DNA of their inventions. They divided the heavens into constellations and the hours into 60 minutes, crafting a system that outlived kingdoms, empires, and dynasties. In codified law, they replaced vengeance with justice, offering frameworks that protected the weak and restrained the strong. In myths of gods and heroes, they explored humanity's deepest fears and highest aspirations, leaving narratives that traveled across time and cultures, from Babylon to the Bible, from Greece to Rome. Sumer's legacy is a quiet one, hidden beneath layers of history, but unmistakable to those who know where to look. Cities rose on their principles of organization, kings ruled with divine sanction, and priests guided moral and spiritual life, all modeled on their earliest experiments in governance and belief. When Hammurabi etched his famous code in stone, he did not create in a vacuum. He inherited the labor of thousands of years, building upon the Sumerian foundations of law, religion, and culture. When Babylonian astronomers charted the movements of planets, when scribes recorded grain transactions or epic tales, they were continuing a story first begun in Uruk, Ur, and Lagash. Yet the Sumerians' greatest gift is not tangible. It is the understanding that memory can be preserved, that human creativity and organization can transcend the lifespan of a single person, and that the act of recording, of remembering, transforms the ephemeral into the eternal. In every tablet, every myth, every law, they whispered to the future, "We were here. We shaped this world, and you too can leave a trace that endures." Even in their absence, the Sumerians shaped civilizations yet to come. Akkad, Assyria, Babylon, all absorbed their innovations, their language, their cosmology. Later empires, scholars and explorers stumbled upon remnants of their cities and scratched clay, rediscovering a civilization that had vanished yet never truly died. Modern archaeology has resurrected Sumer from the desert sands, revealing a people whose brilliance was never lost, only obscured. Their influence pulses quietly through our laws, our calendars, our myths, and our imagination. The story of Sumer is, in the end, a story of resilience, of ideas that refuse to vanish, of knowledge that survives even when names are forgotten, of civilization itself as a beacon passing through time. Though their cities lie in ruins, their people are long gone, and their language has faded from speech. Sumer's spirit endures. It lives in the hours we keep, the laws we follow, the stories we tell, and in every act of remembering that honors the past. Sumer may have disappeared from memory for millennia, but it never truly died. In the invisible threads connecting past and present, in the continuity of human creativity and curiosity, Sumer lives on. They remind us that civilization is not merely built with stone or clay, but with ideas, with memory, and with the courage to record the fleeting moments of our lives for generations yet to come. In remembering Sumer, we participate in their greatest legacy, the eternal act of remembering humanity itself. As we leave the fertile plains of Sumer, we carry with us the story of the civilization that first dared to write, to govern, and to imagine. Their temples, laws, and myths may have faded from memory for millennia, yet their influence pulses through our hours, our words, and our stories. From the clay tablets of Uruk to the epics preserved in Babylon, Sumer reminds us that humanity's greatest achievements begin with the courage to remember, to organize, and to dream. Every law, every star chart, every legend was a step toward shaping the world as we know it. Thanks for watching and journeying with us into the depths of history. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to explore more of humanity's forgotten civilizations and the mysteries that still shape our world.